great way for a delighted John Cleland to start the new season. Second on the grid, first in the race. That'll do nicely. Another 18 left, and will Rydell bog down in the Volvo again? We'll soon know. And the answer is no.
We need to work harder. It's not good enough. 2 engines and 2 races. Not acceptable. The team must push harder. Today, my radar engines must stop blowing up. I'm trying to build a championship.
John Cleland is sandwiched between the 2 BMWs and going for first, says John Cleland. Oh, McNeil sideways, championship leader, entering trouble sideways, he gets it back again. It's Plato and McNeil, side by side.
I'm going to rip your face off. You know what that? I'm going to rip your Hey! What are we doing here? Is this stock car racing or is this motorsport? The man's an animal.
And Colin Turkington is going to become the champion for the 3rd time in his career with 1 race to stand.
Hi again, everyone. Welcome to a brand new episode of Reverse Grid. And in this one, this was an episode that I had on my list when I knew I was going to launch this show. I'm going to try to attack the immortal question that all BTCC fans have debated amongst themselves or with others, probably for eons. I'm not going to do it alone, though, because that would be a bit boring, really. So I've welcomed along a very special guest to help me, a guy who really does know his stuff when it comes to BTCC and motorsport as a whole. He is a professional historian, motorsport commentator. You may already know him as well as the presenter on his YouTube channel, the Motorsport-Detective. Alex Burnham, welcome to the show, mate.
Thank you very much.
How are you doing, sir?
Yeah, very good. Great to be here. Nice to be talking about the British touring cars, which is sort of my my big love in motorsport.
Yeah, isn't it? Well, I would say, isn't it, everyone's, but it was, I mean, when I grew up, F1 was my dad's big thing. You know, I suppose when you talk to motorsport fans, that's the one thing that everyone assumes everyone else is into. But there's something about BTCC which is completely different for me, and I dare say it's the same for you.
Yeah. I went along to my first meeting in 1993
Wow.
as a youngster, and was hooked ever since then. I've seen it on TV and stuff before.
Yeah.
You know, getting to the trackside in 93 was what did it for me. And so
That's
since then,
cool.
it's been touring cars all the way.
Which meeting was that? Sorry,
It was the opening of the 93 season at Silverstone.
Cool.
And so I think it was 2 days after my birthday or something like that. So my dad took me along as a birthday treat, and I was just hooked. You know, it's just the cars looked amazing, and it was just brilliant racing, and it was just from then on.
Who's just read off some of the guys that you would have seen back then?
Well, it was won by the BMWs of Steve Soper and Joe Winkelhock, who then Joe Winkelhock went on to win the championship that year. Cool. And since then, I've been a big Winkelhock and a big Soper and a big BMW sort of fan. So always supported BMW since then.
Cool.
But there was also, a lot of names people are familiar with now. Matt Neal was in it back then, Alan Menu, sort of some of the big names from earlier. So a bit later in that season, you had Andy Rouse, you had Wim Percy, people that, it was sort of a crossover into the new style, going into super touring rules. Yeah. So it was a really good moment in sort of touring cars. Yeah.
Cool. And as people who if anyone's stuck with me through the previous episodes of Reverse Grid will know, recently I've been on a little bit of a history dive myself. I managed to get hold of some old TV footage from 1983 to 1990. So it's a period that I didn't know anything about really before, and I tell you what, I have absolutely loved it. And this is what has spurred this series, and hopefully some of that I may be able to bring some of that out in today's topic when we get to it. But one thing I've left this as a bit of a surprise for you.
Oh, very good.
You've also got this, right?
Yeah.
Look at this thing. It's absolutely huge. 60 seasons. So obviously, amongst all the accolades I reeled off at the beginning, you're the author of that fantastic tome. I'm not even going to call it a book. This is almost going to be my Bible, I think, going forward.
Yeah, I mean, that was great. I did that when the 60th anniversary came around. But I've since sort of thought I could probably do with an update and So it's quite a big thing. So what I might do is split it down into different periods, and add some pictures and some results, and expand it more, but make it into like 10 volumes or something. I don't know.
When I saw you had it and I found it online, because I don't. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Is it on general sale, or is it one that was?
No, I took it. It was on Amazon, that sort of thing. I took it away from publishing because I thought I'd update it, and I haven't got round to actually doing the updating yet. So there are probably still a few copies floating around somewhere.
And that's how I came across this, because I did find one online. I was like, I've got to have that. Didn't realise quite how big it was, and I was like, this is value for money. It's fantastic. So this is why when I knew you were coming on, I was quite excited, especially with the topic we're going to have today, because you're a guy that knows your stuff, and you've touched on there where you discovered or where BTCC started for you. So let's wind it back then. Motorsport as general, where did it begin for you, and what path has it taken you on? Just kind of give us a brief history of yourself.
Well, I grew up not so far from Silverstone Circuit, so it was quite easy to pop along on a weekend. My dad would take me up and we'd go and watch all sorts of different motorsport. And I was really into like the historic stuff. Being a historian, I like history. Yeah. It's always sort of been an interest. So history and cars together. So when I went to like historic meetings at Silverstone, that was brilliant. And so from quite a young age, I was into motorsport, and, I had to get electric sets and all the rest of it as well, and then sort of got into it properly in my teens. Touring cars especially was, sort of a bit of a touring car nerd, but nobody really wants to talk about touring cars. So I was on my own for most of that. Pre-internet days, you couldn't even go online and chat to people particularly.
No, I suppose not.
And then I sort of went into work in motorsport for a bit over a decade. I sort of worked in motorsport teams and some stuff. Okay. So that was all quite good. So I've always been in and around motorsport to some degree. And then using my historian sort of knowledge, I decided to do like the history of the touring cars book and a few bits like that. And then recently, like you briefly mentioned in your opening, I've got into doing some commentary at motorsport events. So it's just something I love being around and looking into. And, it's just, I find it endlessly fascinating.
Yeah, and I can imagine. I mean, if you attack motorsport as a whole, I mean, BTCC is just one thing that you can really fall down the rabbit hole. It's so vast. There's so much of it. You can go in all kinds of directions if you're not kind of tunnel visioned on one particular. So your commentary, you do the commentary at the live events rather than sort of on TV, radio kind of thing.
Yeah, so I've been doing stuff at Lotton Park, which is a hill climb circuit.
Okay.
But they've teamed up with, the whole hill climb sort of world has teamed up with a YouTube channel called Hill Climb TV, who have been live streaming a lot of events. So I've done some of the commentaries on the live stream events, and that's been amazing. What they can do with technology now that could only be done by like the BBC 20 years ago. And now a guy who has set himself up, bought some cameras, and he does an amazing job. And it's a really professional looking sort of footage and all the rest of it. So certainly if you're into hill climbing, find Hill Climb TV. That's brilliant. And it's been excellent fun being at the events, talking. We just had the other weekend the end of the British Championship, so we had the deciding runs of the championship, which was a little bit of history, I suppose, to be commentating on. It's like it's a nice little link. So
that's very cool. How long you been doing that now? Sorry?
I just started doing the live sort of the motorsport events this year. I've done some car shows and things before, but it was never the competition. It was sort of like demonstrations and that sort of thing. But just started getting into that. So might look about doing a bit more commentary if I can find people who are willing to let me.
And there you go. You've given anyone out there who hasn't heard it, Hill Climb TV.
That's it. Yeah.
If you've not heard of it before, I haven't. I'm going to check it out.
Yeah, it's definitely worth having a look. Yeah.
Brilliant. So let's find out quick snippets then a little bit about your taste in terms of cars. So what do you drive at the moment?
I've got two vehicles at the moment. I've got an Alfa Romeo GT, which is very temperamental and currently off the road because of that. And then I've got a Ford Transit Connect van, which has had a little bit of tweaking and modification on it to make it a bit more fun. So,
okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Not something you race around the track in, or?
No, I did ask whether I could take it up the hill climb. They weren't so impressed by that. It is how it's a red van, and I keep threatening to paint it with like a gold top, which is the Alan Mann racing colours of the escorts and things from the British Touring Car Championship.
Okay.
So I keep thinking I might do a touring car replica on my van.
That'd be amazing.
We'll see.
That'd be amazing. Well done. Cool. Okay, let's kind of gravitate towards BTCC. Give us a flavour then of who are your heroes. Again, no influence on what we're talking about today or what's in the book. You know, who you talked about a couple of the drivers that you started off seeing at your first meet. Your heroes, your favourite drivers, favourite cars.
Yeah. So as I said, I was a BMW fan from when I first saw them pushed out onto the track, and they just looked brilliant in that particular sort of the white paint scheme with the checkered flag over the back. And it was quite iconic, sort of 90s BMW look. And then their drivers, Steve Soper, Joe Winkelhock, I particularly followed them over the 90s as they sort of went off and other series or retired or whatever. I sort of always kept up with BMW when they were in the series. But then when they weren't in the series, I'd have to, hunt around for what I sort of fancied. Luckily, over the last few years, BMW have been quite regular with West Surrey Racing, and Colin Turkington, I think, is sort of my favourite of the current crop.
Cool.
He's a really accomplished driver, quite clean racer and that sort of thing. I admire what he does an awful lot. That's always been. But there are so many amazing drivers in the championship, sort of now and in the past. I don't really do the whole partisan. I don't like him, but I do like him. I'm quite happy to just, when Ash Sutton, as such a young guy, has achieved so much. And I think I'm not a fan, but I'm a huge, you gotta
admire
it. What he's done is amazing. So it's, I'd quite like a new champion this year. I mean, we're recording it before the final round of the 22 season. I think it would be great if like Tom Ingram could win or something, just, mix it up a bit. It's just a nice, for the story. I mean, I'd love it. Colin Turkington got another, but,
it was such a shame he had such a, killer of a weekend just gone, really.
That's it. Silverstone from leading the championship to third or fourth in it. Or something.
He's 27 points behind now, I think, which, I mean, in the turn of 3 races, it just shows, what kind of weekend he had. And it just shows the nature of BTCC and the fact that anything can happen. And this is why I love it, really. So, so let's kind of discuss what we're here for then. The immortal question that when I sat down and mapped out the episodes I wanted to do, this was near the top of the list, is just discussing who is the greatest BTCC driver of all time. Who could be considered? Now, there's a lot that we're going to probably unpack in this, because you can have everyone's got their opinion on this. Everyone's got different ways of looking at it, because there's so much. When I sat down, I was like, you can have your favorites, firstly, the ones that you love to see up there. Then you look at the history, championship wins, race wins, win to start ratio. I'll ask you first, when you consider trying to answer this question, what would you be looking at out of all those kind of factors?
It's really tough. Whenever you look at like trying to work out the greatest of anything, I suppose you've got to almost define what greatest means, which is what you're sort of alluding to there. Because if it's outright wins, well, that's easy to work out. But that doesn't necessarily mean the greatest driver, because I think nowadays you get 30 races in a season. Back in the 80s or 70s, there might be 10, 12. I think the smallest season was something like 8 races. Right. So it's not really fair to compare necessarily. No. And so it's really hard to try and work out where you're actually looking for. I mean, most entertaining would be quite good. I mean, I don't know how you'd quantify that necessarily, but
it's quite subjective, that, isn't it? But I think a lot of people would have the same names on the list if you were to go down that route, for sure.
Yeah. So I think it is a really tough question to really answer. So I've got a few ways, like you said, a few sort of ideas of how we might look at it, and then you've probably got a few, and then who knows?
I've got the only way, again, limited knowledge that I've got. I looked at just what I pointed out there. Looking at, championship wins. It's a quantifiable thing that you can look at there. There's 2 front runners correct me if I'm wrong, that have won it 4 times, which is the most.
That's it, yeah.
Colin Turkington, Andy Rouse. Race wins, again, easy to do. JP.
Yeah.
I think if I, and I put the figures I've got that I kind of looked at before. These are a few weeks old, but I don't think in that respect the top 10 haven't really changed, because the only ones that are in there that are still running are Colin Turkington and Gordon Shedden, and they've not really, to my knowledge anyway, they've not added to those in the last few weeks. The interesting one though I was looking at was wins to race ratio. Actually,
yeah. Now I don't know where you've got your numbers from. I've done some maths myself, so we'll see whether we.
That's fine. I will say that my figures come from InsideBtcc.com.
Okay, fair enough. I just did some basic sort of starts to win sort of numbers, and
that's
sort of thing.
Yeah. And again, knowing your head, I'd be intrigued.
Well, it depends. I don't know what inside BTCC. I don't know how far back they go, whether they can't count.
To be fair, no, neither do I.
What sort of wins they count? Because it should be said that up until 1980, well, I suppose not up until about 1990, there were more than one class racing.
Yes.
And then you had independents through the 90s, and then you had 2 classes in the early 2000s, and it's only really sort of in the NGTC period, maybe the S2000 period a bit, where you've only had that single class really of race winner.
Yeah.
So do you count the class wins? I haven't done. I've counted outright wins.
That's fine. And that's one thing when I've been going back into like my journey through the 80s, it's one thing that I struggled with, I will say, in that somebody could win the championship outright, but they had finished, middle of the grid really, because they happened to win their class, but not on, over on the race itself. I'm not used to that.
It's a bit odd. I mean, I'll throw a name in here. Bill Mcgovern. Back in the 70s, Bill Mcgovern won 3 titles in a Hillman Imp, which was prepared by a chap called George Bevan. Bill Mcgovern only ever won 1 race outright. Right. And that was when the classes, they had a split. They had a big cars race and a small cars race. And so in the smaller classes, he managed to win. However, I think one year he won pretty much every single round in his class on his way to 3 titles. So, 1 win, 3 titles doesn't really add up.
No.
But that's because of the class system that they had.
Yeah.
So it's a tough one, really.
I will say, out of the years that I've gone back on, I will be a bit biased. The one season that I did quite enjoy to see that was John Cleland, because I am a bit of a Vauxhall nut, having grown up with Vauxhalls galore. So I thought the fact that he won it in an Astra when the track was dominated by Cosworths, it's a great thing to do. But still wasn't. I was looking at this. This is where I probably wouldn't trust the figures I've got on this one, like win to race ratio, because you're looking at, I don't quite know. You change this to list by highest percentage, and you've got guys on there again that have raced once, won once, so they got 100%. You can't.
Yeah, I haven't really. I didn't really go for those. I thought that sort of thing doesn't really count as a the greatest if you turn up once and just happen to they had some shared drives in the late 80s. You'll probably have seen on your DVDs that, like, the Cosworths, they would do a long race every year, quite often at Donington Park, and it was 2 drivers.
Yes.
So a lot of those guest drivers turned up once, won, never raced again, and so it doesn't really count. No. The absolute top from somebody who's done did a whole championship season, I think, is Tommy Sopwith. In the first year of the championship, 1958, he won all but one of the rounds. He retired from 1 race. So he won 8 races that year. And so he only ever raced that 1 season. Yeah. So his win rate is 88.9%.
Okay.
So he did a whole year. He won every race in his Jaguar saloon, Mark II saloon.
Yeah.
He missed out on the championship, and this is possibly a whole episode on its own, to Jack Sears, who was in a lower class, who'd done pretty much the same thing, but in the lower class.
Yeah.
And at the end of the year, they came to Brands Hatch on equal points. So the only way they could think to settle this was they were given identical cars, and they had a 2-car shootout, basically.
Okay.
So they did about 5-lap race swapped cars, did another 5 laps.
Mm.
And out of those, Jack Sears came ahead, I think, like 2 seconds on
Wow.
aggregate time ahead. And so he took the title. So
Wow.
Tommy Sopwith, almost championship contender, almost 90% win ratio.
Yeah.
Only ever did one series, season. But yeah, so.
Is it the class system? This is really going to scupper, the ability, I think, to answer this question properly, because so much of its history was spent with that. So, I mean, if you were to look, when was it? Was it 1991? Was it beyond?
Yeah,
kind of narrowed it down.
About there somewhere. Yeah, 1991. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it was 91. They brought in the 2 litre class across the board, but you still have the independents. So, Matt Neal was an independent back then. He won a few rounds. I'm not sure if they count towards his overall tally, to be honest.
Okay. Right.
And he's right up there in numbers. He's 63, I think it is, wins, which is, pretty impressive.
Yeah.
I think he's unlikely to return to the series now. He was.
It's a shame. I missed it for a few years when my kids were born, and I couldn't keep up with it at all. And I stopped watching it at the height, really, of, Shedden had won his first couple. Neil was still there. The rivalry with Plato was still there. You had Andrew Jordan coming through. And then I came back and I was like, looking at JP's season, this season, for me, compared to what I've seen before, it's lacking in something. And it's almost like he's got nobody there that's to fight against. You really did enjoy what him and Matt Neal, no matter where they were on, in the lineup, what they were going to do with each other. And just don't seem to have that.
They were both in the series for so long. I mean, Neil did 30 years racing in the championship. Jason Plato was in it for 23 years because he sort of came and went a few times. So they were there for, over a huge period, all those different rule sets, all that sort of thing. And it was that sort of constant. You had some guys that you always sort of. So I think he'll be missed. And it's such a shame he's not likely to get those wins to get him up to 100. Talking of greatest, maybe we should mention here Jason Plato, 97 victories. You can't argue, to be honest. He's got to be in your conversation of greatest.
Absolutely. And to be honest, as a bit of a, again, I'm a Vauxhall, nut, I suppose. But driver-wise, JP is certainly my main hero in BTCC. So I'll always say, like you were saying at the beginning, most entertaining. I think he did it all, really, for me. He was there. He was trying to win races. I know there's guys out there. It depends how you look at it. Do you like the guys who play the game and they know, play the percentage game, as it were? They know what they need to do to get to the top and be consistent? Or do you have someone like JP who is just out there to win every single time? Sometimes it goes wrong. Yeah,
and you've got to say, I mean, although he's only got 2 championships, I think he's come runner-up like 5 times. He's been in the top 3, I think, like 7 times or something. The amount of years he would come into the final weekend with a chance of the championship, and it wouldn't always go his way, and that sort of thing. But he was always, like you say, always fighting, always pushing, and possibly to the point where he's lost the title several times by pushing too far. And he should have played the percentages earlier in the season or something.
Exactly.
Like I said at the start, I'm not a partisan person. JP's never been one of my particular favourites. But I've always been impressed with what he did. I mean, he turned up his first race weekend in the Renault Lagunas back in the 90s, stuck it on pole. I think he won, maybe not that weekend, but, it wasn't long, and instantly made an impression. And I suppose those Lagunas were the best car on the track probably at the time. But it still takes the skill to go out and do it. And in the Super Touring, the Astras, all the way through like the Chevrolets, all that sort of thing, he was always pushing, always there. Making the most of it. And it's only the last few years I don't know, maybe it's age, maybe it's other issues, I don't know, but it's probably maybe it's the right time for him to go.
Maybe.
But I so wished he'd got to 100. Maybe he'll stick around till he gets there. I don't know.
I was going to say, is that just going to be the one thing that he does keep pushing for? But the longer it goes on, is it going to happen? It's got to be a bitter pill to swallow that you're so close. And I mean, who are the front runners behind him on that front, according to my figures anyway? Next one behind him, Matt Neal, 63.
Turkington's the
Way
same,
away.
I believe,
Is
63.
Yeah, it is quite a sizable gap there. I mean, obviously Matt Neal's not going to increase on that. It depends if Turkington's around long enough to mount a
Yeah.
charge on that. But he's at least put his name in the history books for that, and certainly a serious contender for this.
I personally think the only one at the moment of current drivers who could rival Plato, I think, is probably Ash Sutton, who has enough years ahead of him if he stays in the series to get to that. Theoretically, I mean, with 30 races a year, you could knock off 100 in 4 years, couldn't you?
Yeah,
It's unlikely, but
it's possible.
So I think Turkington, he's obviously got a few more in him as long as he stays in the series again. But that's another 40 wins he needs to find. That is a tall order, I think, when he's towards the end of his career rather than at the start. So I think Jason will be history books for a good while on that, even if he doesn't make the 100.
So I think if we're looking at, say, shortlisting here to try and answer, I don't for the second believe we're actually going to, we're going to find the magic formula by the end of this episode. But if we're talking about a shortlist, I think Jason Plato absolutely has to be up there for his wins alone. I think that's definitely a contender as a reason to be there.
And I think, as you mentioned before, the championship wins, I think, would be the next part where you have to look for your next sort of shortlisters.
So we're looking at the moment then, obviously Colin Turkington is joint top anyway. Every chance he could have done it this year, he's left himself a very, very big hill to climb. May not do it this year, but if Ash Sutton wins, obviously he ties.
I personally think, Ash Sutton's got the possibility to do it this year. He's with Ford for a few years, I think, in that Napa team. Theoretically, they can only get better, sort of thing. Maybe he could do another couple. He could break that for, because at the moment it's only Turkington and Rouse who have managed it. So
there's every chance that we will see a 5-time champion between one of them, in the next couple of years, 3 years, whatever. So obviously, that would that makes it quite exciting. That means there is a current driver there that could actually again break that record and be up there and be a contender already. Let's talk about Andy Rouse for a second, because again, through the footage, the time that I've gone through, he was pretty dominant. I would say, he's another guy that I've loved to watch. There's another nearly guy, 4 titles, but the years as well that he just missed out because of a few. He
missed out. He missed out on quite a lot of championships because he was in the top class, and the way it used to work was the top guys would fight out for wins, whilst one guy lower down, like John Cleland in the Vauxhall, would dominate and take the title. And so because it was more competitive in the top class, Andy Rouse probably could have picked up another couple in the 80s. He himself benefited, some of his titles were from lower classes as well, so it's not all against him on that. But what I find really impressive about Andy Rouse, he raced in, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 different rule sets. So the types of car that were racing, he went through loads of different rule sets and was still always competitive. He would turn up, certainly in the second half of his career, with cars he had built and designed and developed himself, and be better than the works teams, or would be dominant. And that, as an engineer, he was an amazing guy as well. And then his win ratio, because again, back in the 70s, 80s, there were a lot less racers. So Andy Rouse's win ratio, I've got at about 25%. So he got 60 wins from about 230 starts. So about a quarter of all the races he entered, he won. Which compared to Turkington, who's on about 12%, for the same number of titles, and roughly the same number of wins. So you could just see, Rouse was a lot more efficient.
And even look at Plato, according to, again, my figures as well. Plato with the most race wins is just under 15%.
I've got to say, if Rouse had been starting his career in the 90s rather than ending, and he had 30 years of racing in double headers and triple header meetings, he may well have been well up on the. But obviously, that's ifs and buts are impossible to work on. But I think Rouse certainly for a good chunk of time was the benchmark for everyone else. Even if he wasn't always the best driver on track, if you could measure how well you were doing compared to where Andy was on the circuit, sort of thing.
So he's another one we got a pin up there, really. So we've got, if we say so far, so Turkington, Sutton, again, really good that we've got a couple of guys that are still out there racing, got years ahead of them that to break more records. Jason Plato, Andy Rouse. Any other front runners that your knowledge spring to mind that should be considered for any other?
I mean, again, you'd probably look at the multiple champions. So there are several guys who've got like 3 championships. Bill Mcgovern that I mentioned earlier, who did it in the end, I probably would discount him, not because he wasn't a good driver, but it was in a very particular time in that class, in that car, in that period. When he changed car later in his career, he never had the success that he had earlier, and you sort of think he was right place, right time. So I wouldn't necessarily put him as the all-time great. However, you got people like Wyn Percy. He had, similar to Rouse, he has 3 championships, some of them in lower classes than the top one. So he's only got 10 wins to his name. But he had a long career over various different formula, different rule sets, different types of cars, that sort of thing. So I think he certainly was a good driver. You've got people like Frank Gardner. Now, Frank Gardner probably should be a proper consideration. He again has 3 titles, 35 race wins, so a decent number, and a 42% win rate. Almost 43%, so a really sort of high win rate. And his titles again came in a whole variety of cars, sometimes in the big like Chevrolet Camaros and that sort of thing. So he really proved himself. And outside of touring cars, he was racing in sports cars. He did some Formula One stuff. He did all sorts. So he was definitely a bona fide driver, sort of thing. And was for a good, 10 years or something, 15 years, was like Andy Rouse was a few years later. Frank Gardner was the benchmark, was like the top guy. So I certainly think he would be considered. However, I think maybe because they did less races back then, his win tally's not up there. You start to sort of then have to look for other things to discount people with, don't you?
One thing I was thinking as well is you just sort of reminded me of there by talking about drivers who won in, say, different classes or even a range of different vehicles. I'm not going to say the reliance on one type of vehicle, but the guys who have much of their success in one sort of vehicle. Do you think that is a good thing or a bad thing?
I don't know. I suppose sometimes you just click with a particular style. Like I think some of Jason Plato struggled with the Subarus and things because they were rear drive and he'd got so used to front drive. So maybe there was something in that. I think back to Alan Menu, who I think he was the most successful in the super touring period in terms of wins, both in the Renault and then in the Mondeo later on, 2 titles. Was always up there. Again, he was second in the championship, I think, like 3 times in a row or something, and then won it. So he was definitely up there. But then he disappeared after that, came back for a brief period, which was rather unexciting and not very successful. And so you do sort of think, well, okay, in that period, Menu was brilliant. But do you count him as one of the all-time greats of the series? Is he the greatest ever? It's hard to judge because he only had a sort of a short period of participation, a short period of sort of success. I don't know. Whereas people like JP or Colin Turkington, even they've been there over different types of rules and always been competitive. And Andy Rouse, who could come back in any car and win pretty much, it proves that there's something a little bit more, perhaps.
I again going back to Andy Rouse, I'm not going to bang on too much about him. I just thought his run was fantastic in that he, along with Gordon Spice, dominated in the Capris, and then he kind of took over the car I absolutely love. And this is a whole other topic we can get into at a later date. Is the different types of car. One of my favorite cars was the Rover.
Oh yeah,
SD1.
Yeah.
And it became a bit like, I find it's the one that's sandwiched between the success and the domination of the Fords when you had the Capris and the Cosworths. Something happened in the middle with these Rovers, and all of a sudden, a bit like the Cosworths, the grid was full of them. But again, when you've got, what happens, do you think, with the competition when the grid is dominated by a particular car? I was sat on the fence with this. I was like, yeah, it's good competition because it comes down to the driving, I suppose, and the setup of them. But is it just a little bit too kind of congested and not enough variety?
I personally prefer a bit of variety. So long as all the cars are of a relative pace. There's nothing worse when, I think, back in the early 2000s, you had the Vauxhalls who were on another level compared to the Peugeots and things like that. And so the competition there was only amongst the Vauxhalls, really.
Yeah.
You know, eventually things like AMGs and then the Hondas eventually came. But for a couple of years, it was all about the Vauxhalls. And so you don't have that variety, like you said, that we do now or in the sort of mid-90s. But at the same time, the Cosworth period, because everybody had a Cosworth, it did come down to, and half of them were built by Andy Rouse, you know, it came down to how good you were at, you know, driving that particular car. So I think it has sort of pros and cons both ways. I personally prefer a bit of variety, because I think, again, if you can make your car win in every situation, I think that shows you're a better driver and have a better team. I mean, like modern day, the cars are underneath are all very similar, and so the differences aren't like they used to be. You used to get some circuits that really favoured one manufacturer over another. I find
that really interesting, actually.
That has lessened now. I think. I think they're a lot more similar. So if you're good one place, you're probably going to be all right everywhere, sort of thing.
I had a great question come to me then. So we're talking, obviously, we're trying to, I'm very unsuccessfully trying to kind of narrow this down to who the greatest driver is. As it's going forward, I've got to get your opinion on this, the hybrid, as opposed to, you know, the ballast and the rules we've had before. What do you think this is going to do to the competition between the drivers? Is it affecting anything? Is it still down to the driving, or is there more technology involved now?
I think I mean, apart from like Turkington had issues with the hybrid, which then pretty much knocked out his whole weekend. It's a shame that the hybrid can affect it that well or that much, whereas the ballast system wouldn't have done.
No.
I wasn't a big fan of ballast. I preferred like the racing a bit more pure in a sense, having the weight to you know, mix it up a bit. I never hugely liked, but it was mostly successful, so I sort of let it, you know, I don't complain about it too much. The hybrid, I think they'll tweak over the next few seasons, and we'll see which direction things go. They'll find better ways of running it, better ways that it can be implemented. The idea is fair enough, I suppose. But it'd be nice. I think, they probably will think about it and try and rework it a little bit.
Something they can tweak, I suppose, isn't it? It's, you know, technology is what it is. I think it's probably been accepted. I liken it to when VAR came into football. You know, on paper, it was a great thing to have. The fans did nothing but bitch about it when things were going wrong. It's probably one of those. It's early days, isn't it? It's just one of those things. I thought, you know, at what point do we sacrifice the talent of the drivers themselves? Because I heard Nigel Mansell say it when he compared F1 cars when he was driving to now. He said you can drive them with one finger, and you know, you had to be built like pretty decently to control a Formula One car back in his day. You know, that's another. Have we lost an element of the driving now when we give it over to, you know, technological advances?
Possibly a bit. And throughout history of like motorsport, things change so often that it's hard to sort of look. Although Mansell's right, it was very physical driving back in his day. Drivers nowadays are so much fitter that they're probably still working quite hard. They just don't look it because they're able to cope a lot better than the, you know, think back to the 70s when James Hunt was smoking and drinking between races.
That's very true.
He obviously looked awful after a race because he could barely make it. You know, in a similar car, a modern driver probably wouldn't have anywhere near the problems because they're so much fitter. It's so hard to sort of judge. But I think there's always change. Complaining about it and sort of going, oh, it was better in my day, is a little bit pointless in a sense because it has changed. So it's best, I think, accept it and enjoy it for what it is. And, Alan Gow, Tocker aren't stupid. If hybrid is not producing good racing, they will change the rules. They will find a way to make it good. It might take them a few seasons. It might mean that hybrid isn't the same in a few years it is now or whatever. It always changes. And I personally, I would prefer without all the wings and aero. I'd prefer it to go back to more like the early 90s when it was production style cars. But that's my preference. I'm not saying it would necessarily be better. That's just what I like.
I'm with you there. The one thing, I've said this before, the one thing that drew me to touring cars was the fact that they were cars that I saw out and about. They were cars my dad, drove and stuff like that. I could relate to them. I've never got on with Formula One because to me, I can't relate to those things. They are purpose-built racing cars. A lot like Btcc ones are today, I know, but they still kind of resemble ones that that you see around and you could see yourself driving. Maybe I think that was it really when you were a kid, isn't it?
I completely agree, but it is what it is. It moves on, it changes. And the great thing about British touring cars is every single rule set has produced brilliant championships and great rivalries and amazing races. And even people now complain about the early 2000s, the Vauxhalls. Go back and watch those DVDs or whatever of those races, and there's some great racing. And Plato and Muller and all of that lot, it's just as good as what we've got now. It's just things change.
Different, isn't it? And this brings us quite nicely full circle, if I'm honest, because the reason why I think it is, statistically you could answer this question, but I think when you delve into it like we have tried to, you can't answer this question because of, even in its relatively short, I would say 60 odd year history, Btcc has changed so much. Regulations, technology, everything is there's so many factors involved. I think it's very difficult to say we have found the one who is statistically, scientifically, whatever, the greatest touring car driver.
No, I agree. I mean, I was going to sort of say at some point that I think, to be honest, you can't answer necessarily unless you do define what greatest would be, and then you can otherwise it's too wide. I mean, I was going to sort of throw a bit of a spanner in the works and say possibly the greatest touring car driver ever would be someone like Jim Clark, who won the championship, won lots of races both in lower classes and sort of outright. Only won one championship, but also won Indianapolis, also won all those Formula One races all at the same time. So not in his championship year, I think the following year, he won Indianapolis. He went to Canada and did a sports car race, and then he flew to London to race at Crystal Palace in a Lotus Cortina in about a 5-day period.
Wow.
Now, can you see any of the current Formula One crop getting out of their Formula One car and then being in the sort of Honda at Silverstone for touring cars the next week?
This again brings me back to probably the same Mansell interview actually that I saw, in that he compared the two, and you can see he's not a very big fan. He didn't have a great stint in the Btcc, but he simply couldn't. I don't think he really could go from one to the other. So to have a guy like that who could go to all those different types of competition and succeed, maybe.
I mean, back then I guess maybe the cars, Formula One to touring cars, weren't maybe as dissimilar as they are now, perhaps, because you had Jack Brabham, you had Graham Hill, you had quite a few of the F1 guys doing touring cars as well. But if you look in more recent times, the number of Formula One drivers who've tried touring cars and failed horribly. In fact, I don't think all of the successful Formula One drivers struggled in touring cars, and the ones who struggled in Formula One, people like Gabriele Tarquini, would turn up and win. So maybe there's a not succeeding in F1 and winning in the touring cars, maybe there's a link there. I don't know, but you've got people. You have all sorts of like people, refugees from Formula One who would turn up. Most recent, I think, was Johnny Herbert in the mid 2000s. Did a few races for Team Dynamics in the Hondas, and he struggled. And you know, he was a good driver, Grand Prix winner, but you know, couldn't cope around Rockingham. Yeah, it's
hey, it's different territory.
Exactly. So yeah,
that's all it is. I was just quite surprised. I think it was one of those almost like almost like the endurance races, I think, that you touched on earlier, that they used to have at Donington or whatever. Damon Hill.
Yeah.
I didn't. Yeah, completely. I was like, did I hear that right?
Yeah, David Coulthard did a race.
He did. Yeah.
In a Vauxhall that he said was the worst car he's ever driven. I think. Yeah. So yeah, and I mean those endurance races used to get all sorts of second drivers. So you've got sort of like, I think Stig Blomqvist was in one time, you know, rally drivers and all sorts. And it's just it's quite an interesting thing to do again now, but I'm not sure how it would,
I don't know,
how you'd achieve that sort of thing.
I think my worry, I saw a few of them, and I think the worry I had is that, someone can pace set at the front and then they hand over to someone else. What happens if that lead goes? It happened with Rob Gravett. I can't think who he had with him, but he was there, and Gravett did the first half, handed it over. He had the lead until the last bend, and he lost it. And
that might actually be Steve Blomqvist. Actually, it might.
Well,
I think it was a rally driver. No, I think lost the race on the last corner.
Right. Yeah, you're right. And it's like, Gravett thought he was homing dry, and then all of a sudden, I think it was Andy Rouse possibly took that.
Yeah.
It's anyway. Okay, so we could sit here and we could do this for hours. It's been fantastic, kind of just trying to rip it apart and see if we can, dig under the layers here. But gun to your head, who would you pick
as the greatest touring car driver?
It doesn't have to be based on anything statistical or anything like that, but who in your mind encompasses it for you?
I think I'd have to go. I can't. I just cannot. Possibly if I broke it down into different periods, you could pick the best of each period.
Okay.
But
and this is the problem coming from the man who
exactly
this, I think, as opposed to me.
Yeah.
Who, by the time I finish this, I may well have a different mindset. But
yeah, I mean, at one point, I would definitely have said Andy Rouse. Then, more recently, you've got Plato and Turkington who have messed with that. You've got Ash Sutton, who I think will probably end up being the greatest when he's done, given a fair run of it. But then you've got people who didn't necessarily make a big mark in British touring cars, but did in elsewhere. So you've got people like Roberto Ravaglia, who only ever raced in the British series for 1 year and didn't really do anything. But he's won 8 other titles in other touring car championships. And you sort of think, well, he must be good. But so I just couldn't sort of
I was interested to see, after all your knowledge and everything, all of your research, whether someone sprung out. I mean, for me, again, limited as knowledge as I have, I think Jason Plato would always be there as my favorite. But I think from what I have delved into over the last few months, Andy Rouse, I think is probably up there for me as probably having more of a claim to, as an all-rounder. Number of race wins aside, I think he, championship wins and what he did out there, and the fact that, again, he could get behind the wheel of a few cars, and he was always at the front. I think the titles that he lost were on this class system thing, and it was the competition they had in that main class which was the turning point. But there we go. That's mine. Again, give me a
I wouldn't disagree, to be honest. I think Andy Rouse probably would definitely be in the final few when you were trying to work it out. I just don't think I could.
The best way we could do it: gather them all together, stick them on the track, do a few hot laps, and then see who comes out. There you go. I don't think that's never going to happen, but that would be a lovely idea. Lovely idea. Listen, Alex, this has been fantastic, mate. I really, really enjoyed this. But before I wrap it up, I'll give you a little bit of time just kind of introduce your YouTube channel, because we discussed before we started recording that I watched a couple of episodes myself over the last couple of days and absolutely love Motorsport-Detective. Tell us more about it, what it is, where we can find it, what it is you do, really, because I think it's intriguing.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, it's the Motorsport-Detective, Alex Burnham, the Motorsport-Detective. There's YouTube. There's then the social media, sort of Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages, which all then link back to the YouTube channel, really. And basically, what I have been doing is I find some film, like some old cine film, 8mm cine film, or home shop amateur footage, maybe a photograph or something like that. And I look into that and think, well, what's the story behind this? So I will then try and work out what race meeting it was, who's in the film, what cars, what track. And then usually when you start digging, there is a story there. So, you know, you start with just a bit of film about some race cars, and by the end you've learnt something. So I've got stuff about, you know, races from the 60s from tracks I've never heard of. We were talking about Lake Garnet in America, a track that raced for a little while in the 60s. I happened to find some footage of it, and yeah, it's amazing, sort of eventually discovered about that. Or I found, you know, footage of Grand Prix meetings or touring car races, and a bit of digging, you can find out some amazing stuff. So it's sort of delve into the history of motorsport through these things I've discovered. I've got a little archive of footage and photographs and a few, you know, memorabilia sort of bits and pieces, and all of it has a story. So I sort of use my my best detective skills to try and work out what it is and find out a bit more about it. So it would be great if anybody wants to, you know, discover a bit of motorsport history. Come and join me on the Motorsport-Detective.
I'll do that. I'll have it.
Yeah,
Mate. I'll have it.
That'd be brilliant. Yeah, follow a link or just search in, you know, any of those, and come along and find out a bit of interesting. It's always a bit fun. You know, it's not too serious, but it's just a bit of interesting stuff.
It's very, very cool. And I mean, it begs the question: which came first? So the idea of doing this, and then you gathered all this, or is it stuff you had already that you decided to delve into?
The photos, I've always been a keen photographer, so I always took photos, and you know, I've got quite a lot of pictures from, you know, racing meetings I've been to, and then other people would give me photos, and I'd pick photos up, and, you know, so that was there. And then I was given an 8mm cine projector for a Christmas present one time by my brother, and I thought, oh, what on earth am I going to do with that? And so I bought a little 8mm footage of Sterling Moss driving around Brands Hatch. I thought, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll look for motorsport films, and it just gone from there. So I've now got boxes full of cine footage from all sorts of places, you know, all over the world, that I've just picked up where I've found them, where I've seen them. You know, some people have sort of, you know, one lady said, oh, you know, I don't want this. This is my husband's. You can have these, sort of thing. You know, it just and you know, I watch it and I think, oh, that's brilliant. You know, so I decided I'll do something with that, and I thought other people might enjoy discovering along with me. So rather than me just tell what it is on this footage, I play the footage and then sort of try and bring people along as I discover what it is as well. So it's a bit sort of investigative, you know. I think sometimes people are probably well ahead of me because they've recognised things I'm missing or whatever.
It's all part of the fun, though, isn't it? I mean, they're quite digestible episodes as well. You know, sort of like 10 minutes or something.
Yeah, I kept everything under 10 minutes. The ones that went over, I sort of split into episodes. So when there's a lot of information, I had one film that was sports car racing, and when I actually watched it, I realised it's actually footage from 3 different meetings.
Oh wow!
So I split the footage up. I found out which bit, you know, it was all jumbled up, so I mixed it into the proper races, and then each one of those gets its own episode. So it's sort of you know, you can see me trying to figure out what track things are on, and, you know, then what car it is, and then what championship it might be, and who was doing it and who won. And so, you know, you start with just a bit of a mystery, and you end up with all sorts of fun stories. It's entertainment.
I wouldn't like to imagine how much time and effort goes behind one of those episodes, and you're representing it in, you know, 10 minutes or whatever. And all respect to you for that. I like to say I'm going to delve in and I'm going to go through whatever, you know, all the rest.
Yeah, I mean, a great one to watch is there's a bit of footage which shows an Austin Metropolitan or a Nash Metropolitan racing. And as far as I'm aware, this is the only footage in existence of one of those cars racing in period, because they just weren't raced. And it took me a good, you know, years of searching to eventually track down the race meeting and the driver and all the rest of it.
Wow, okay.
But they're brilliantly, in the last few years, there's a team who have built heritage for like places like Goodwood and National Metropolitan to race in the Goodwood Revival. So I went along and I chatted to them and I met them, and they were, it was brilliant because they never thought that there was anybody had raced. They decided to race the Metropolitan because it was the most ridiculous car they could think of. And then, they discovered that somebody actually has. So, yeah, that was good.
Oh, brilliant, mate. No, there we go. Everyone go and check out Motorsport-Detective. And also going back, Hill Climb TV as well. So if you take nothing else away from this episode, the fact that you are going to argue with us who you think is the greatest BTCC driver, you've got options out there to go and see what Alex does, as well as if you can track him down like I did, go and get yourself one of these. This is going to keep me busy for a long time. Like I say, this is probably going to be my Bible as I go along. Now that the season's coming to a close, I need some material. We've discussed the possibility of you coming on,
I'd love to come back and chat on other things.
Absolutely. There is so much that we can so many rabbit holes we can go down. So yeah, absolutely. Alex, thank you very much. Until the next time, mate. This has been
Thank
amazing.
you, Chris.
No worries. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, share, and hit the subscribe button. Also follow us on Facebook and Instagram to keep updated about all future shows.